In this episode of Ask Me Anything, I got a great question on YouTube. The question was, my hamstrings are always so tight and never seem to relax. Even after I stretch them out or do some yoga, why won't they loosen up with stretching? In this episode, I cover 2 reasons why they continue to be tight, why stretching isn't helping, and what to do to get them to loosen up for good. I hope you learned something new and enjoy the show. Welcome back to the Injuries Explained project, where we are on a hell of a mission to make chronic injuries obsolete by helping anyone that is injured and in pain get properly educated and informed on all their treatment options so they can have the best possible outcomes without ever having to resort to pain pills, injections, or surgeries, which only make things worse. My name is Dr. Maggio. Thank you so much for stopping by and checking out the show. Just a quick disclaimer before we get started. All of the information presented in this episode is strictly my opinion and in no way, shape, or form should be misinterpreted as concrete medical advice or treatment recommendations. If you're currently injured and in pain, please reach out to a qualified medical practitioner for a full diagnosis. If you've already done that, you haven't got any answers, you're frustrated as hell, you just want to get your problem figured out and on the path to getting it fixed, you can reach out to us directly and request an injury consultation. All the information to do that is available in the show notes or wherever you might be consuming this information. Now that we got the boring stuff out of the way, let's get right into the show. There's a big problem in I call it the musculoskeletal treatment world of simplistic thinking, trying to make everything very simple. And one of the big problems that is found is this idea that if something is tight, the way to fix it is to just stretch it. It's tight, stretch it. The problem that most providers that are trying to give you treatment or help you is they have to understand why it's tight in the first place. This is what I do in my own clinics and the people that I train and teach is getting to the root cause of why something is tight, why something is weak. Because if we can't understand why this is happening and we just try to throw some random treatment at it by stretching it or strengthening it and not understanding that maybe there's something else deeper going on and a bigger problem going on, we're never going to be able to fix the problem. And a lot of times we can make that problem a lot worse. So I see this all the time with people that have tight hamstrings. They're like, I just need to stretch more and more. Just like that question I got. I get probably 5 or 6 of these a week. Like, hey, why are my muscles so tight? I'm doing stretching, I'm doing yoga, but it's not really helping. So there are 2 underlying causes of tight hamstrings, and I'm going to go over each one of those in this episode. So first one is there's what's called an entrapment of the sciatic nerve. I talked about this more in depth in episode 9 about what this happens, but basically you have your sciatic nerve and it comes out your back, goes down the back part of your hip in your butt, down your hamstrings. And what happens over time is we just overuse our muscles. Maybe we're sitting too much. Maybe we're actually exercising too much. We're doing something and then the blood and oxygen can't get into the muscles. And when this happens, your body actually starts to lay down scar tissue that builds up. Over time, that scar tissue gets bigger and bigger. It starts to expand out. And eventually it gets stuck to that nerve. And when it gets stuck to the nerve does not like that. Because if the nerve gets jacked up, gets tight, I said tight there, it's tight for a reason because it's getting stuck. So when the nerve gets stuck, the body tightens up to protect everywhere around there because it doesn't want the nerve to get compromised. Because if the nervous system doesn't work, you don't work. So your body will sacrifice a lot of other muscles around the area to protect it and tighten up to protect that deep underlying nerve problem. There's a really good test that you can try out on your own. So stand up, keep your knees nice and straight. And then I want you to bend down and then ask yourself, do I feel any tension like behind the knee or in the calf on either side of those tests? And this is usually caused by that nerve tension and that entrapment. It's coming from the sciatic nerve getting caught up in the hip, deeper in the hip. I covered more of this, like I said, in episode 9, where we went in depth more like, is the sciatica coming from the low back or from the hip? Go back and listen to that. It'll really help you with some symptoms and where you feel to get a better idea. But yeah, doing that test and bending down, if you're feeling it in behind the knees into the calf, You shouldn't feel that at all because you're not stretching that area. What you're feeling is actually that nerve tension. It's getting stuck up top and it's pulling harder down there. So a lot of people think they're just getting a good stretch when they try to stretch their hamstrings. Oh, I feel it like down to my knees and below my calves. No, all you're doing is pulling that nerve and really making it angry. So that's the first underlying problem of tight hamstrings that a lot of people miss, is the nerve is just getting stuck. Next one is there is actually an injury to the low back, specifically the discs and the joints in the back. So basically what happens in between your spine, you have these discs in the joints and they protect the spine. But over time, that scar tissue, I talk about scar tissue a lot, most common cause of decreased flexibility, pain, and weakness in the human body. It builds up over time and it gets around the spine, and eventually it puts more pressure on the discs and the joints. When this happens, it can start to compromise and put some pressure on the spinal cord, on the nerves. And once again, remember I said the body's number one mechanism is to protect the nervous system. So if those areas are compromised, those muscles are going to tighten up more and more. Then usually what happens is the hamstrings tighten up to protect the area. They engage in this protective tension because the back is already getting compromised. It's having problems and it can cause some issues in there. So the hamstrings are like, all right, I'll help out. I'll lend some support in there as well. So they kick in to support and protect the back. But the problem is now they get less blood and oxygen. And I always say this, imagine if you walked around and flexed your bicep all day long, was just in a flex all day long. You're trying to floss and show people how tough you were. That bicep would be tired and sore as hell. This is what's happening in the hamstrings. They're getting beat up. It's causing more issues in there. And people are like, oh, the hamstrings are tight. But that's where I get to the question of why are those hamstrings tight? They're tight because they're doing so much work. And if you stretch them, you're actually going to make them pissed off and cause more issues in there as well. So a test to try for this to see if it's coming from the back, same test that you did where you stand up, knees as straight as possible and bend down and try to touch the floor. This one, what I want you to think about is, was there any pain in the back itself as you go down or maybe as you come up? That's telling me there are some damage to the disc or some problems in the low back, and that's why those hamstrings are tightening up. A lot of times you can have a combination of both in the calf and in the low back as well. There's no rule that says you can't have two problems, a sciatic nerve entrapment and low back scar tissue formation in the muscles. So now to the part of the podcast where I would say what I would do and not do to get this problem fixed. Number one is I would stop stretching. This whole idea, like I told you, the nerve is getting stuck and it's engaging in protective tension. So basically what happens is those hamstrings are tightening up to either protect the nerve or protect the low back. So when you do a stretch, what it does is it temporarily allows this window where you do relax a little bit and you feel maybe just a little bit better. But this is what's happening with this person that's on the question. And they're like, I do some stretching, but it never seems to last. So what happens is you relieve that just a little bit. You take some of that pressure off, but now it exposes that nerve entrapment even more, exposes those discs or joints getting bad as well. And that can be a big issue in there as well, because that protective tension is done for a reason to unload the area. I kind of say it's like when you sprain your ankle, your body knows to limp. This is what's happening when those hamstrings are tightening up. They're trying to protect something deep underneath. And if someone's just telling you to strengthen them or stretch them without understanding why, it actually can be really dangerous. Next, I would start by getting a full assessment on my hips, my low back, and my hamstrings from someone that specializes in like functional movement and can do a full evaluation instead of just trying to isolate one area like the hamstrings or stuff like that. Everything kind of works in unison with that. And then spoke weird there. I would get to an advanced soft tissue practitioner that specializes in hands-on scar tissue treatment to the sciatic nerve, the hamstrings, and low back. You know, I've talked about this. I talked about in episode 2 about scar tissue, but the idea of getting proper depth and tension and breaking that down, they tend to specialize in like myofascial release, things like that, to actually get in there and be able to effectively break down that scar tissue and get that range of motion. Because the first step in getting the problem fixed is getting that range of motion back and freeing up those nerve entrapments and everything in there. And once my range of motion was improved and I knew the tissue quality was better, then I would start strengthening what's called my posterior chain, specifically my hamstrings, my glutes, to get them back to normal because they've been beat up for a long time. You got to get that bad tissue out of there. then you can start to strengthen it. I always kind of say, think of this problem as like a cavity that needs a very specific drill and very focused by a good practitioner. And then exercising and movement and strength is kind of like brushing and flossing. The problem you're running into with is stretching or trying to strengthen it before you clean up the tissue is like trying to fix a cavity with brushing and flossing. It's kind of late for that. So a couple lessons from the episode. Number one is if you're working with someone that tells you your muscles are tight, but they can't tell you why, and their only answer is to stretch them, then they are in fact a moron and will never be able to help solve your problem. Number two, always make sure any manual provider that you go to, that uses their hands or provides treatment, does a thorough evaluation on the injury before ever jumping into treatment. If you get there and they have you fill out like a two-second info form and have you jump right on the table right away, they're not going to be able to figure it out. It's a complex problem. You need a thorough and detailed evaluation. Would you take your car to the mechanic and just have them start working on it before they ever ran any tests? That's what people do a lot of times when they just jump right into some treatment before ever knowing what's going on. Those providers suck. They're not going to fix you. They don't have a clue of what's going on. Please support the show by sharing this with others. If you have any other questions or topics you want me to cover on Ask Me Anything, just send an email directly to us. And lastly, as I say all the time, if you're looking for real answers about what may be going on with your own injury and you're tired of getting jerked around by the medical system, then please just reach out and request an injury consultation with our team. All the information for that is available in the show notes or wherever you might be consuming this content. I appreciate you guys listening, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye.